everyone, and in this video I want to discuss how we should approach creating the illusion of height in our little turtle shell here. For me, this is usually one of the first things that I try to establish, because many of the coloring details that we're going to establish for the shell and for the textures are going to be linked to the illusion of height. We want to be able to paint our textures with as much height information early on in the process so that we can make some really informed decisions. And here are a couple ideas, and I think the application of the paint layer system inside of Substance Painter is going to be a great place to begin. So here's how I'm going to start this entire process. Let me show you the goal and what we're striving to accomplish. I've already completed the painting of all these masks. This is what it looks like when it's on. And we're going to be using some simple height layers in conjunction with some masks to really allow us to go in and customize the look of all of these little lines. In my imagination, these are kind of like growth lines. Every year the turtle grows a little bit bigger, and these shell lines start to appear to kind of like rings on the tree to define how old this turtle is, and I want my turtle to be a little bit older than others. So these height lines were an important detail for me to establish in the sculpture itself. I chose to do these with textures versus with traditional polygons because of the detail that I wanted to apply into the height lines itself. When it comes to the geometry, I was always going to be sculpting across all of these, all the polygons and the flow of the geometry in my sculpture, so I was never going to get the detail or the accuracy that I needed. So painting a height map was really the best place to do it, or the best tool to do it. Let me show you how it works. It's relatively easy. Let me turn off the final example here. And we're going to focus our attention on maybe this big section here in the middle. So we're going to start off with a fill layer. Now these fill layers are fantastic. It's this icon right here inside the interface. And the fill layer is going to allow us to flood an entire area with a whole series of channel information. It can be, of course, color, height, roughness. We can define some details in these fill layers. For this one, I think it's really a great strategy to focus in on just the height. So with my new fill layer selected, I'm going to go down into the material properties and the available material channels inside of this specific object, and I'm going to deactivate color, roughness, and metal. The only two channels that this fill layer is now going to be responsible for driving and creating is going to be height and normal information, which is kind of height and bump information as well. So if you think about it, this one fill layer, sole responsibility is going to be height. Let's go in and start adding some additional values in here, or some additional information that will allow us to modulate the values and the amount of height inside the scene. Now right now with fills, like I mentioned before, it's just flooding the entire area with a singular color or a singular value. Down in our properties, you can see what that value is. It's just 0 at the moment. So we're not really getting a good understanding of the impact of all of this. Well, let's start to add some additional items in here that will help us determine where we want this height information to go. And we're going to do that with a mask. Here we go. I'm going to right click on the fill layer. And at the very top here, I'm going to choose Add a Black Mask. And as we explored last time, these masks allow us to activate and deactivate the visibility of certain effects. With a background full of just black pixels, we've completely deactivated the height, the change in height inside of this environment. And let me just paint in some simple information here. So once we create the black mask, the next thing that we should do is that we should add a paint layer. And you can do that under the Effects pull-down menu. And we're going to have an entire conversation about some of these effects. But the one that I want to draw focus to in this particular moment is the paint effect. And this paint effect allows us to paint down some stroke information on the mask itself. Now this isn't too different from just painting on the mask, but what we're going to gain in this process is the ability to copy and paste this mask into other environments. It also makes it non-destructive. It comes with its own opacity channel, so we can feather and reduce the effect as we go. We can also blend this effect with other effects inside of the mask itself. So it creates a very powerful, non-destructive system for working with masks, and I find that they're incredibly useful. So with the paint effect applied, I'm free to go in and start painting. Keep an eye on this part of your interface, because this is going to tell us quite wonderfully the color we're currently painting into our mask, which is white. So right now, we're going to paint white. Now, we're not seeing anything because we're looking at the total material for this object. We're seeing all of the effects of our substance inside the viewer itself. In the top right-hand corner, we have a pull-down menu, which allows us to change what we're seeing in the viewer. And now I'm going to look at just the mask, and you can see the result that I'm getting here. And I can very quickly and easily just paint some masking information. Now, what this translates to, let me go back to our pull-down menu and look at our material. Now, what this translates into is the ability for us to return to the fill layer. And when you're working with masks, just be very mindful of the blue outline that's surrounding each of these objects. The blue outline determines the properties that you're going to see downstairs in your property panel. I want to go back to the fill layer and change the height information. And the moment I start to raise and lower this height information, you can see quite wonderfully the effect that we're having on the actual object. Let's return back to my paint layer and continue our work. I could go in, let's just make the size of my brush a little bit bigger. I'm not going to sit here and go through and paint all of this, but I think you can start to see the power of this system inside in Substance Painters. Working with masks is a great way to very, very quickly create some wonderful effects, and it's non-destructive, and that's how I like to work. I want to be able to give my future self an opportunity to make a change. I want to give my future self the opportunity to change my mind a little bit, or to maybe see a different creative result. Now, I went through this exact same process about 5 times to create all the little stair-step strata, if you will, for the entirety of my turtle shell, and I want to walk you through the results that I achieved. And so you can start to see how all of these masks are working together to get the final result. I went through literally the exact same thing. It's just a folder. I placed all of my masks in a folder, all of my fill layers. So this is a fill layer. If you look very carefully at the channel properties, we're just working with height and normal, and I have 5 of them. And the value change between them is very small. The first one, the height value is 0.01, then 0.02, then so on and so forth, just incrementally, making it slightly higher on each one as they stack on top of each other. If we were to explore the effects that I've applied, I have a simple one down here. This bottom, let's look at the top one. It's hard to see the bottom one. Let's go to the top one. It's the exact same structure on all of them. So I have a paint effect that just does the basic blocking of all the shapes. And if you look very carefully, it's pretty clean and consistent. The line that's created with the strokes is very, very basic. At times, I even turned on my stroke lazy mouth, which is going to smooth out all of my strokes as I paint inside the environment. But then it looks a little too uniform. It looks a little too clean. It doesn't really look organic. There are no straight lines in nature, so we want to start to break it up a little bit, and that's what the next paint effect is. And this is really where the power of these multiple paint effects come in, especially when working with height layers, is that we can block out a shape, and then we can modify that shape non-destructively very, very quickly. And it's pretty successful, and I'm really digging the result that I got. And I just slowly went around, and I painted each layer by hand. Didn't take too long. There's a lot of them to do, but the end result is a whole lot better. The other thing that we gain by working with these height values and these masks is the ability to use these height and mask information in other parts of our entire substance network. So it becomes a really powerful asset inside of our texturing system. It's a reusable tool, if you will, inside of our substance texturing process, and I'm going to be continuing to use that as I sculpt all the colors and determine how each layer is going to have its own color information, or maybe its own roughness information later on inside of my texturing sequence. So working and creating the height values is really easy when we work with masks, fill layers that are just accessing the height channels, and of course some wonderful paint effects.